Yeah. So what I'm hoping that we can review today are the draft definitions. The document that I just linked is draft definitions for SMS 11.4.24, and that's in Basecamp. It's publicly available. There were 3 changes that we made last week, and Martina, you were part of this, and I should change the date on that. It should be 11.4. The first one is we added the sentence, sexual harassment can be accomplished by one person or a group of people to sexual harassment. Okay. And then if you scroll down to the second page, the last 3 paragraphs there. So people were fine with all of the definitions that we've got, but I realized we hadn't defined harassment or violence based on sexual orientation or gender identity or expression and gender-based harassment or violence. So there's a couple of draft definitions that I put in there. And so if you want to make changes, or I see just a space. And Jenna, are you able to open that document?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
I have it open.
Okay, great.
I'm still chewing my cereal, but I have it
No
open.
worries. No worries. I'm happy to share screen if that's easier, but if we can all open the document, I think that's just as good.
I like this language. I know we went back and forth a lot in that meeting, whenever that was. Was that last week? Was that a year ago? Who's to say?
It was a different timeline.
Yeah. And I got real sick last week too, and I'm still recovering. So my brain is a little bit oxygen deprived or something to that effect.
Oh my goodness. Sorry.
But I think that this is I really like the way that you framed this. And I like in particular the way that I know it was kind of hard to torture out the language on that particular piece of harassment or violence based on sexual orientation. But I think that last paragraph there, that last stanza, if you will, I think that does a good job of kind of encompassing it.
Yeah, this is great work. I only have one thought, or and let me know what y'all think of this, but the only thing that stands out to me that I might want to change is the word deviation. Just because, deviant, it's just carries such a heavy meaning for a lot of communities. So I wonder if we could maybe say perceived nonconformity with, or something along those lines.
Okay. How about just perceived difference?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Love it. Love it.
All right.
Yeah, I recall we talked about
looks
that.
Amazing.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I recall we talked about that in that meeting last week or whatever it was. And that particular spot is really tough, right? Because the people who are the people who are committing the violence perceive it as deviation in that negative sense, and the people who are experiencing the violence are like, I'm just being me. And so I think it is a tough needle to thread, but I think perceived difference from gets at it in a neutral way. So.
Okay. One thing I just this definition is from, I can't remember, it's from some national or international organization, and they've got arbitrary deprivation of liberty. Do you feel like we need that in there? I'm not sure that that's necessary for this definition.
It definitely makes sense on a state-based level, and I think I recall that this was the UN.
I think so, yeah.
Was it Bell brought this one to us, right? I can't remember who did. So yeah, it makes sense on a macro sense, right? I don't know so much if it makes sense on the sort of forms of individual person-to-person violence that we're kind of actually talking about in this sexual misconduct survey.
What if we change it to exclusion? Because I feel like that might be more relevant for our definition. Okay, so I'm going to delete arbitrary deprivation of liberty and change it to just exclusion or social exclusion.
Maybe exclusion or ostracization. That's such a clunky word, but
if I can spell it. Okay, I got it. I'm one of those people who has to type it out and then look at it and go, yeah, that
Yeah.
looks right. So,
Spelling is just visual memory, so
Yeah.
it makes total sense.
okay. Exclusion or ostracization and economic deprivation, whether in public or private life. Okay, I like that. In addition, GBV can be rooted in gender-related power differences. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that that would actually meet exclusion would actually meet the just because exclusion is such a broad term. I just want to make sure that students are understanding like what meets this definition and what doesn't, you know? Not that someone might, I mean, who knows? Who knows? Someone might feel like, you know, not being included in cliques is like a form of gender-based harassment. And I just want to make sure that if we're changing the definition, that we're adding stuff that actually meets the criteria, you know, does that make sense?
Mhm.
And it might.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
I think that's
if
really
it's,
okay.
oh, sorry. No, Rowan, you go ahead.
No.
I think that's a really great point. And if I'm thinking about if it is based on perceived gender performance, essentially, like for lack of a better word, that's not a word I would use in this because I don't think it would be legible, but I think for us, we know what I mean when I say that. If exclusion from like full participation in social activities as a result of gender performance, then I would say that that does count as harassment, which is different from just like, you can't sit with me because I don't like you. And also somebody thinking like, well, I'm not a woman and so I can't participate in the women's support group. That is not gender-based harassment.
Right.
But if all and only support groups are only available to women who meet some arbitrary definition of womanness, then it would be. So I feel like to me it fits as a definition. It does require a little bit of thought, but in a way that does feel important.
We could change
Yeah.
exclusion to something like deprivation of social resources or ostracization.
I'm okay with any and all of those.
I think exclusion might be a little bit more understandable. I think deprivation would be hard for a sort of general understanding. I like it makes a lot of sense to me and I like it a lot as a term, but I'm thinking in general deprivation might not have the same, might not be legible in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. And just a reminder, these are definitions that are for the implementation guide for the colleges and universities. They won't be seen by the students. We don't really need to define it for the students. We just need to describe it behaviorally.
Right.
The one thing about just exclusion that I'm thinking about is if you have so right now, especially, I'm trying to think of where people who aren't in, who kind of like this behavior might attack us, right? And so I'm thinking about, exclusion from participating on a boys' football team because you're a girl, right? And that could be considered, is that gender-based violence? So I think, so that deprivation of social resources is really kind of what we're getting at with that exclusion there. It's not, you can't sit with us, but there isn't any place for you to sit, right?
Yeah. In that case, I think maybe you're right to say deprivation or denial of access to.
Okay.
Like would be I think perhaps in addition to that, the deprivation language might be helpful. I mean, all of this is so complicated, right? When we're in a world where from the highest levels down, we are seeing gender-based harassment, right? Like it's kind of hard to have this definition when it's like we also have people who are going to actively put in legislation that says that here's the definition of what it means to be a man or a woman. And if you don't meet that definition, you can't play on the sports team when there's like 150 of those athletes in the goddamn country. Not like I have an opinion on this.
Yeah.
I think we're all with, I hope we're all with you. Yeah.
So if we change it to denial of access to social resources or ostracization
Yeah, I like
and
that.
economic deprivation. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And thanks for the clarification, Rowan, that this is not for the students, because that is also, this would be really hard to write in plain language, which I should know how to write all of this in plain language, but I don't.
No, it's really goddamn hard.
It's
The amount
hard.
of time it took in our staff when we were updating our survivor-facing materials to define the difference between civil and criminal law, like months of late. Like it's
Yeah.
so hard. How do you
And
do
then
Yeah.
that?
there's administrative law, which is, entirely right. Like, yeah, it just, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I know. I always try and think, okay, so how would I explain this to a 5-year-old?
yeah,
Right.
basically.
But yeah, no, it's hard. Yeah, unfortunately, right. Yeah, fortunately, that's for this application because this is for the schools and the implementation guide. We don't have to worry about that. If we do need to think though, maybe in some of our outreach materials, right? That committee might want to think of ways, but then that's their problem. They can figure it
Right.
out. So yeah.
And for them, I would say that like probably the best thing to do would be to give examples.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like contextualize, because these terms are so abstract. I mean, even we keep having to use examples to kind of like walk ourselves through it.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Martina.
It's not pneumonia, but it's not pneumonia.
And it's not COVID.
No, I got all the tests. It's some kind of nasty upper respiratory infection that's going around in Eugene. My doctor was like, "Yeah, you're just gonna feel like shit for a week," and I was like, "Great, thank you." Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm a lot better though. I really am. So.
Then I'm really sorry because you sound awful. I'm sorry
It
that
is
this
kind
is
of funny
the
where like
better
I'm so
version.
much better. I know I look like I'm 3/4 dead, but I'm so much better.
No fun.
Okay. All right. So we got gender-based harassment or violence. And then by harassment or violence based on sexual orientation, we mean any kind of violence against someone. Okay, but and we're okay with that. Okay, great. Hey, great. I'm going to save this and upload it and share it with the language committee.
Wait, the language committee or the
Oh, I'm sorry,
survey
the writing committee.
Yeah, got
Thank
it.
you. Got it. Okay. And then the trauma-informed language guide. I did not do, what is our latest version of that?
Yeah. I haven't seen that since I sent my thoughts.
So I uploaded a draft. So I don't know the best way to do this. So tell me if you think that this is inconvenient, but we have on Basecamp, we have our trauma-informed principles document. And then I added a note where I uploaded a new draft that has like track changes. I don't know if that's the most efficient way to do this, but I just kind of couldn't figure out another way.
That's
And
absolutely
that's
the
the
best way
newest
to
one,
do it.
right?
Yeah.
I do think that's the newest because I didn't see anyone else. And
Should we be naming? Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
For just to keep track, should we maybe be naming the copies with like the dates
That's a really good idea.
and the month? Because I don't remember the date.
Yeah. Martina, you can also, so what's helpful maybe is to have the document with the date and then just your initials, just so we know. And then you can go ahead and what you did is fine, but you can, probably the best way is to say replace with a new version, because Basecamp will track all of the replacement versions as well. So if you scroll down, it will, when you, every time you make a change, it'll have that.
Oh, okay, that's great. I thought about that and I read the note of download and re-upload, and then I was like, surely I shouldn't delete the old one though. But now I understand. That's awesome. Thank you.
Very cool.
Well, I don't know if you guys want to just like walk through it a little bit. You guys left awesome comments. And so on this draft, I have track changes turned on. So I accepted most of the stuff. And I think it's pretty evident where I have like made some edits. Like there were some things where I just moved stuff around a little bit for clarity, not a lot. And then I had a couple spots where I asked some questions. Where am I?
Do you want to share your screen maybe?
Oh, sure, if that's helpful.
Sorry. I don't know if you guys heard that.
All right, is it showing okay for you?
A little bigger, that would be great. There you go.
How's that?
Okay, that's good.
Okay. So if I go to the top, so this is stuff that Rowan, I think you added, really awesome. So here was one of my questions. So the thing with fight, flight, freeze, fawn is that some of it is biologically different and some of it isn't, if that makes sense. So it's a little hard sometimes to separate because they're not actually three, especially fight, flight, freeze, aren't necessarily completely independent physiologically, though with freeze, there's some more neurochemical stuff that is happening. So with dissociation, it could go into any of those categories. It's just so dependent on the person. So I guess that's my question for y'all. What do you feel like makes most sense?
I think having it in freeze makes the most sense, but
I mean, that's definitely where it's most evident and obvious. Fight and flight, there is a lot of dissociative elements, like particularly related to experience of pain. In the fight and flight response, the like physical dissociation is really intense. In freeze, like it is more like depersonalization, derealization, and then immobilization. And so it's like a little hard to parse. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, I was specifically when I wrote that comment, I was specifically thinking, and I don't know if this is helpful or needed, but I was specifically thinking of folks who have survived like chronic or multiple instances where like their brain might just automatically dissociate.
Yeah, flipping the lid. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know if that is like too in the weeds or I just know, I've talked to so many survivors that have shame around that or just confused, like why does my brain always do this? Um, yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing what you're typing too. Yeah, so I don't know if there should be a note. I don't know if it should maybe be mentioned just in freeze or in both or in I just wanted to bring that up and see what we thought.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, oh, sorry, Rowan, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wonder if we can say something like can you scroll back up? Okay, in the sentence where you're saying these cues can be categorized as the 4Fs, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and then something added to that says these are not exclusionary categories and people may respond in ways that are not captured by these generalized categories.
Great. Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay. Yeah, because I think for all of us as people in the field, like our tendency is to go, and there's all this other stuff too, but we're trying to make this understandable for someone who maybe doesn't have our background. And so I would actually suggest removing the sentence in flight that Martina just added, because I think we do mention dissociation in another one, and I think it just gets confusing if we're saying this is flight, well, and it's also freeze.
Totally. And remind me again, so this document is going to be on the website for the committee. It is going to be included in materials sent to colleges and universities. It is not going to be given to students.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is more of like a framework
Mhm.
preparatory document. Okay.
And I think one really important thing to point out is this is, as far as I can tell, this is really the only document like this that will be on a state website. So we want to get it right.
No pressure.
But it's also really, really, it's a really important and valuable document to have access to. I would love to be able to show this document to the other folks at HEC because they're really curious about this stuff. They understand that trauma has an impact, but they don't necessarily know what that means. And the trauma-informed center that was at PSU, as far as I can tell, is now defunct. I don't know if they lost funding or if they're just not operating, but
I'll follow up on that.
okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah, it'd be
I
good
think
to
you're-
know.
Oh, a kitty.
This is Angel. He's special.
Hi, Angel.
Okay, and I just saved this as a new draft with my initials and the date, though, like, honestly, we could probably give it all of our initials, but whatever. Okay, I'm still going down. Yeah, so this is, so Jen, I think your point here is really good. Like, we don't really have a bigger definition of post-traumatic stress disorder. I wonder, maybe even to Rowan, to the point that you were just making, do we want to have a section on the differences between like the diagnostic status of PTSD and like post-trauma as a thing? Or do we think that's also kind of in the weeds?
I have an opinion,
Please.
but I want Rowan's opinion first.
One, I'd like to see emotional/mental health. And I feel like
Right.
post-traumatic stress disorder is at least popularly understood. I feel like there's enough folks out there who kind of understand that we don't really need to explain that. I don't know if there are other things in there that we could also spell out a little bit more, like disordered eating. You could go anorexia, binge eating, or whatever. But I feel like just for examples, those are probably okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jenna.
I think if we're going to do, I think we should either capitalize it or put in parentheses PTSD next to it, just to kind of differentiate that from like the emotional numbness, like this is an actual diagnosis. And yeah, I think that's fine if we want to leave it there. I also think if we wanted to go more in depth, we could have a note or something, or like a paragraph that says like something along the lines of someone may or may not have diagnoses associated with their trauma. Some people find this empowering, some people find this disempowering. You may see like some of these diagnoses, just kind of a broad catch-all of like, there are a lot of diagnoses that are known to be associated with trauma, not just PTSD. And also, like, just because someone doesn't have these doesn't mean they didn't experience trauma, and vice versa.
So sorry, Rowan, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think you need other mental health disorders there because you've already got depression, anxiety, panic attacks. So, and Jenna, I get what you're saying, but again, I'm worried about getting too much in the weeds there. So
Totally.
I think some common ways, while trauma response is highly individualized, some common ways that trauma can impact people include, and then maybe a sentence at the end that says some people may not experience, you could say something like, some people may not experience any of these, or may have different responses.
Yeah, totally. I'm down with that.
I'm trying to remember what you just said and it fell out of my brain.
Or have other responses.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe just like, this is not an exhaustive list,
There you go.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if they experienced no effects, then it probably wouldn't be categorized as traumatic, right?
Well, yeah. Can you scroll back up again a little bit?
Yes, one second.
Sorry,
I
when
want to
you're done.
say
Mhm.
these symptoms may also vary in severity and may or may not meet official diagnostic
Great.
criteria
Mhm.
for
Okay.
certain mental illnesses, but are nevertheless impactful to the person experiencing them. Something like that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm scrolling up. Where did you want me to stop, Rowan?
So, in emotional, and so one thing that I think folks don't get, I would say under emotional and mental health, I wonder if we could add anger and how would I say it? I hate the word oppositional behavior, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of folks are extremely angry. They are, they're not wanting to hear anything you have to say because their anger hasn't really been acknowledged enough
Right.
yet, right? And so,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I think a lot of times folks are, you know, people get really, they're like, well, they're just so angry, like,
Yeah.
I can't do anything with them. They're angry. And it's like, well, yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Going back and forth between I'm trying. Is there anywhere else in that list where no,
I
that
mean,
would be
the difficulty is that emotional, mental health, and behavioral are also so related. So we could also collapse these two categories and say emotional, mental health, and behavioral, because they're so interrelated. I grabbed this from SAMHSA, which is why I have this framework, but it is such an arbitrary distinction between those things.
it
Mhm.
is. And I think you could say the same for physical. I kind of like having it broken out as behavioral because I think it's understandable.
Hmm.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, we know there's really no difference. These are all connected, right?
So
The physical, yeah.
maybe we put this under behavioral then, because that is people externally experienced as a person's behavior rather than like an emotional or mental illness state, if you will.
Mhm.
Like again, with the acknowledgement that like what's the distinction there? But I'm thinking from the perspective of like educators, right?
Yeah.
Like we see those two states as kind of different. Like, oh, this is a really angry kid versus this is a kid having panic attacks are kind of noticed differently.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if that's something that would also be helpful to have in developmental for that reason, like the oppositional defiance specifically in developmental, or if it's better to have in behavioral.
It's so hard, right? Like it so depends on when it shows up, right? Like if it is
Yeah,
oppositional defiance in elementary school, then I would say yeah, developmental. If it's oppositionally defiant adults, I would say not so much. Oh,
right. Right. And
I
this is specifically for, young adults, right? Teens, young adults that people are going to be thinking about.
I would put it under behavioral just because these other things are not necessarily behavioral.
yeah,
The other things that are
Yeah.
developmental there are not necessarily. So I think
yeah.
putting it under behavioral makes a lot of sense. And I think maybe generalized anger might be rather than just anger, but I don't want to say inappropriate because I think it's appropriate, but
Right.
that just
Yeah, and we want to
generalizing
be
it,
careful not to lean towards like abusive behaviors as
Mhm,
yeah. I like
Yeah.
generalized anger.
mhm,
Yeah. And I think that that goes well with the behavioral piece around self-destructive or compulsive behaviors.
mhm,
Right? Like these are the behavioral responses to the emotional or mental health experiences, right? Like these are the symptoms. This is the core,
mhm.
if you will. Uh, like we diagnose eating disorders as a separate mental illness, but the eating disorder is not the same. The eating disorder is caused by the underlying whatever it is. The eating disorder is the behavioral response.
Yeah.
One thing I think, so I don't know that these are necessarily, some of these might be symptoms, but a lot of these are, I think, coping mechanisms as well,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
so I wonder where down where we talk about
Mm.
symptoms in that first paragraph, if we could say something like, so maybe scroll down a little further in that first yeah, there. So this is not an exhaust, right? These, let's see. So if we could say these, okay, there you go. Thanks. That works.
What I kind of want to say, I think I'm having a hard time figuring out how to word this, but I think your point is really good that we want to explain in some way that these behaviors are these are coping mechanisms. Coping mechanisms can be adaptive or maladaptive depending on when and in what ways they are deployed, but they are morally neutral.
Mhm.
Like that's a thing that we talk about a lot with the survivors we work with, that like whatever you had to do to survive is okay. There's no there's no value judgment if what got you through last night was getting drunk. I hope that there are coping mechanisms that we can help you access that better meet your goals for the future. And also, like, if that's what kept you alive today, I'm glad you're alive today. And I don't know how to word that in any other frame.
Mhm.
Yeah, and also if you want to keep getting drunk and you don't want help with that, okay.
Mhm.
Like that's not
Mhm.
Yeah.
it is yeah.
Maybe we could talk about some harm reduction. Could you do weed
Uh-huh.
instead of a
Exactly. Yeah.
depressant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the other thing is I really worry about over pathologizing survivorship. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like, oh,
Yes.
you poor thing. Of course you're all messed up because of what happened to you, rather than,
Mhm.
look at you surviving.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
there are arguments that some people make that, and this is one of the places where, again, like my personal values are on display, related to mandated reporting. There are some people who would say that mandated reporting for many people includes the category of like vulnerable people who are vulnerable as a result of disability, and that trauma is in and of itself a disabling condition, and therefore any
Ooh.
person who has experienced trauma is in that category and should be
Mhm.
reported on. And I'm like,
Mhm.
go to hell.
Good
Right?
Don't do
luck.
that
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah.
Our
I've heard the
systems can't
arguments.
even
It's
handle
wild.
the amount of reports they're getting. Good
It's
luck
I
that
know,
reporting on
right?
like 1 out of 3 people.
Yeah, it's
I
that
know.
patronizing, well, we know what's
Mhm.
best for you because you're so messed up that you can't possibly,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, we need Big Daddy to come in and fix you, you broken little piece of shit.
right. And
This
it's
is on
not
the
real if
record.
you don't report. Yeah. They
Yeah,
can't, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what,
Yeah, I agree. I agree on the we don't want to over pathologize. We want to encourage people not to be judgmental. And I
Mhm,
think we can get into that in like trauma informed communication later
Mhm.
too.
mhm.
Um,
I think just coping mechanisms can be adaptive or maladaptive is probably okay. Yeah.
Can I say,
Yes.
yay! Love it.
um, I want to say something like this list is not intended to pathologize, merely to
Mhm.
describe. Is that
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Can we, when we're done with this whole survey thing, can we write this book, please? Because there
Yes.
isn't one.
Let's do it, baby.
Okay. Seriously.
Ooh, I have a wonderful book recommendation that I'm currently reading, and the
Okay.
author is amazing. It's called Healing Honestly.
Mhm.
And shoot, let me see. Hold on. It's right here. Alyssa Zapersky is the author. And it's The Messy and Magnificent Path to Overcoming Self-Blame and Self-Shame.
Ooh.
It says the least re-traumatizing read on childhood sexual abuse for survivors by a survivor.
Oh my
And she's
gosh.
amazing. She's like completely irreverent. She's very funny. She cusses a lot in the book. So I'm gonna
What?
type
Say
that
her
in the
name one
chat.
more time.
I'm gonna put it in the chat, but Alyssa
Oh,
Zapersky.
putting it in my list.
Because yes,
Okay.
I agree. There's not a lot of material that isn't, oh, you poor thing.
Mhm. Right.
That's
Or just
awesome.
describes how terrible everything is, right? I
Right,
really
right.
don't,
Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Don't
yeah.
need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Or
Especially,
conversely, does bright siding with post-traumatic growth. And it's just like,
Mhm.
oh, you're better now as a human, rather than like, can we just be people?
Mhm.
yes, yes. I
Neutral.
think, well, and we talk about that in here, right? Or you talk about that in here, right? About the person first
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
language. Yeah.
Um, okay. So we feel pretty good, I think, maybe about this section.
hmm
Okay. Going down.
Or I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and Jenna, I ended up putting this down in the examples of victim blaming language, I think,
Great.
because it's such a good example and I think a subtle one. And I couldn't really figure out another place to put it. Does that feel okay for you?
That's fine. Yeah, that was
Okay.
when I was first taught about trauma informed, that was how it was framed, was like the whole
Mm.
framework is coming from a place of what's
Mm.
happened to you versus the medical model of what's wrong with
Mm.
you.
Oh, I like that. I have actually never heard that. Should we put that
It
in here?
helps me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I Yeah, I'm happy with it wherever. It helped me
Mhm.
kind of conceptualize. How does that feel for you though, Rowan?
I love it.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, yeah. I think it's kind of the core of being trauma informed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's from the sanctuary model, which we did a lot in the DALs. I don't know why, but the DALs was like really heavily bought into the sanctuary model, which is like its own thing. And I have feelings about paying people a lot of money to teach you about trauma informed care, but that was helpful.
I think one thing we all need to recognize, oh, we do recognize after we've been here for a while, is that there are fads and trends in this kind of work, just like in anything else. And
Mhm.
somebody in one community can read a book, and suddenly everybody is like, okay, this is our model now. So
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing with like the body keeps the score, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's so many people's just Bible for everything because it was like the only thing that
Yeah.
people knew how to reference.
yeah,
Yeah.
so do not recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, especially now that he turned out to be a
Little bit of
meathead.
a little bit of a hothead.
Oh dear.
Mm-hmm.
I do
Yeah.
have to say, one of the things I love about the internet is that, and Reddit in particular, is that Lundy Bancroft's book, Why Does He Do That, is available on
Mm.
PDF, and it's constantly the thing that people are referencing. And I'm just so grateful for that because I think it's such a good exploration.
I
Yeah.
still have never read that.
Oh, okay.
And
Um,
I will read it if people that I respect recommend it. So I just was always turned off. Gendered language always
Yeah.
gives me pause, but I respect your opinion, Rowan. So,
Yeah.
um,
I don't
and
know.
I think
likewise,
my Rowan has it in their office.
Ah,
likewise, I think that Peter Levine's work is becoming more understood, and the like Waking the Tiger and the other like
Yes.
psychosomatic elements is, I think, starting to
Yes.
be and like starting to be framed in a way that I think is a little bit more productive than The Body Keeps the Score, because it's within that same framework of like bodies have these experiences and they last,
mhm.
but less in the sort of pathologized way that I think Body Keeps the Score can sometimes. Yeah. Anyhow,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna resolve this, even though okay. Um, okay. I'm just gonna resolve these
Mhm.
because I can.
And Jenna, just so you know, I gave that book to people of all different genders, and I would always say just ignore the gendering in it. You know, he's writing it for a popular audience, but I think in the book too, he does a really good job of saying anybody can, you know, it doesn't matter the gender of the people, they can do this.
Great.
But
Okay.
yeah.
Um, okay, so when we got down into the sort of like survivor centered, empowerment based, blah 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 language options, I spent a lot of time talking about victim, survivor, blah blah blah. And then I was like, uh-oh, perpetrator, what do we do there? So do we feel like this is sufficient? Do we want to add more? I feel like I could either write 10 pages about this, or like I couldn't find the way to not be like, people can change, but also what are we doing? And like carceral responses are bad. Like I just couldn't figure out how to not overcomplicate it.
I think campus is hard, so I would lean on Rowan and Kevin and you, Martina, for around that. But my general thought is just to put in a note saying use whatever terminology the survivor wants to use, um,
Mhm.
because I'm used to working with survivors. So if you're in a school and you're going through the Title IX process and you're like working with the person that caused harm and the person that experienced harm, I don't know if y'all would have a different way that you would want to talk about that, but
Mhm. No, I think that's a really, really good point. And Martina, back to your question, I feel like keeping that brief, maybe add offender, so perpetrator, comma, offender and abuser. Um, I think keeping that neutral is really important because the other thing, like Jenna, if we were going to get into like making it, if we were going to expand this into the book length version, I think we would need a section on the fact that these are not exclusive categories and people may
yes.
may be survivors in one sense and then also perpetrators in another. But I don't want to do that here because it's kind of distracting.
Got it. Yes. Yes, and.
Yeah. Because that was really hard for folks, I think, in on campuses, because they're like, I know he has a history of sexual abuse, and so I guess that's why he does this to me. And it's like, well, no, he does that to you because he's making a choice to do it to you. It's like,
Yes. That is
Well,
still such, I was literally just arguing with somebody online yesterday about that.
mhm,
That is such a pervasive yeah, that's going to take a lot of undoing
yeah.
to teach people the actual roots.
Yeah, the only thing I could always say to people was most people who've had those experiences are never going to hurt someone. So therefore it's
Mm-hmm.
not causal, something else
Yes,
is going on here. Yep,
that's exactly what I said.
yep.
well,
Yeah.
and given that for so many of us, our work is specifically and explicitly excludes us from working with people who are themselves perpetrators, even though
Yeah.
we understand the like, especially in terms of incarceration, like the like very real complications there, it just ends up feeling like such a like I feel so morally compromised sometimes when I talk about that because I'm like, well, we can't work with perpetrators.
I know. I
What the hell
know.
does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah, our field has a lot of work to do on the black and white thinking.
It's still a pretty young field. That's, I feel like every year we get a
That's
little
true.
bit. Yeah, it's when we start getting politicians involved, honestly. Or people who are coming from a religious basis and have very strong moral opinions about stuff.
Yeah. You're right. That's a good reminder. It is a very young
Mhm.
field.
Yeah. Marcy, get down.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Marcy.
Who's Marcy?
Marcy, come here, baby girls. This is
Marcy's.
Marcy.
Marcy.
She's
Oh,
um
she's sweet.
she's so sweet. She's such a good girl. She's a new foster. I've had her about a week. She came from a place where she was very, very well loved, but it was just not an appropriate place for a shepherd lab, 1-year-old shepherd lab.
Oof.
Like she's,
That's
yeah.
a lot of chewing.
Well, there's not actually, she doesn't do anything inappropriate. She's just so unsocialized and didn't get any exercise or anything. So, no, she's an awesome dog. Like she's
Oh, I
really,
want
really
her.
good.
I
Yeah.
didn't know you fostered, Rowan.
Well, my dog passed away a couple months ago, and actually my last service dog passed away on election day 2016. So I just know
Jesus
that
Christ.
Oh my God.
I know, right? So for me, like it's anyhow, I need to having a dog is great for me. It's very therapeutic, and it's also a way that I can put a little bit of kindness back into the world, which is my only coping mechanism right now because I don't like
That's a
getting
lovely
drunk.
one. That's
Yeah,
very
right?
adaptive.
I recommend it over my coping mechanisms, so go for it.
It's wonderful. That's how I ended up with my little teeny cat, Beep. She was a foster. Beep.
This is why
I
we
wish I
can't
could
have
say I came up with
fosters.
the name, but
My
what?
husband will not allow it because I would keep all of them, and he is right. I would.
Yes.
He is
Yeah.
correct on that one. I would not give
Yes.
them up.
Yeah, the only I
Marcy.
am not doing it now because I live in a studio apartment and there's nowhere to keep them separate from mine, which is probably good because same thing. I would fail.
We lost our dog who was trained as my medical alert dog a year and a half ago, and adopted a dog that we were told was a lab shepherd mix in February. And it turned out that she was not a lab shepherd mix. She was an Anatolian shepherd who was scooped off of the streets of Tehran and brought here. So she was not just an Anatolian shepherd, she was like a wild animal. And she loved my
Whoa.
husband and I. And then as soon as she started feeling comfortable in the home, she started like attacking anyone other than us who came into the home. And she was only like 11 months old and weighed 90 pounds. And so we had to go find a farm for her to live on where she could actually herd some sheep instead of
Do her
biting
job.
my
Yeah.
father-in-law. It was
Mhm.
really bad. It was a whole thing.
Yeah, one of my neighbors has an Anatolian Shepherd in I live in an apartment complex in the middle of Portland. It is, and I live right above where people take their dogs out to go to the bathroom. And she
That
is,
poor dog.
yes, I'm very unhappy about it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a
Because yes,
half
they are working
acre.
dogs.
They're working dogs. Yeah.
They need things to guard. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she genuinely did. She was a wonderful, hilarious, sweet, funny thing. But our dog trainer was like, this is a wild animal. This is not a domesticated dog. This dog is never going to be compatible with the lifestyle, even with a half acre of land. You don't have sheep for it to herd independently for 6 months of the year. It's like, okay, valid
Mhm.
point. We love this dog, but we will give this dog to
Oh,
someone who can care for it. It was a whole thing.
that's very
So
nice of you.
Lab Shepherd, better choice.
Well, she's very available. She's
I
so
love
Marcy,
her.
Marcy,
look at her. So actually,
she's so
my,
sweet
ooh,
face.
so where is she being fostered from?
Golden Bond Rescue.
Golden Bond Rescue.
Yeah. Yes.
I'll tell my friend because her
Okay.
parents' dog, they had to let her go last year. Hi, buddy.
She's a good girl. She's a very good
Her
girl.
smile.
And she's a lap dog too. She's just,
Is she?
yeah.
She's obviously good with cats because you have cats.
Yeah, she's getting, she did the shepherd thing where they follow them around and stare at them intently for, but she's kind of getting over that now. So, and Mama Cat's the little tiny tabby, and so she's explained the rules. Um,
Yeah.
she smacks, but not excessively. So yeah. Anyhow, Marcy's figuring it out.
That's amazing after a week.
Yeah, she's so
That is a
good.
very good dog.
Yeah, yeah. She's gonna sleep in the bed. She's gonna crash on the sofa. Yeah.
Wow. All right, I'll tell
Lord.
Taylor.
Yeah.
Oh,
Feel free to give my contact information.
Okay.
I'm subsumed with jealousy. I'm not allowed to talk about having another dog until spring. That's the rule in this household now, and it's fair
Oh.
and it's valid, and there's good reasons, and I support my husband's right to also have decisions about the dogs we raise, but I want all of them.
Yeah.
I hear that.
Okay, I'm just scrolling down. Okay, so I went through common victim blaming stuff. I added a couple.
Oh, I love it. I love that you included the non-consensual sharing.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, Rowan, you made the point somewhere later that you'd like to include other types of sexual misconduct, which is what got me thinking about the questions and how to maybe expand them a little. I feel like I keep running internally into the roadblock of most of our examples that we use are sexual assault specific
Right.
because of the work we do. But actually, I'm really trying to think now about how all of our language we can be a little bit broader in. So this has been really just useful for me. Thank you. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or if you want to just give it a go a little bit on expanding some of these sections.
Can I
Yeah.
ask, so there's that one comment that I had made, the one that's crossed out there. Did we put that someplace
I
else?
moved
Or?
it.
Okay.
I moved
Okay.
it up to here.
Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it felt so important that I didn't want to have it
Okay.
underneath in a separate, like I felt like it was so important to include as its own paragraph. So so I just put it here and added some of the stuff that it added in the middle of some of the other stuff you'd added. And please, when you go through this yourself later, if you want to like make any of the other changes you want to make, I was just kind of playing around. So yeah, these sections here, especially where you were saying rewriting to include other types of sexual misconduct. Um, yeah, I was struggling a little bit, so that maybe that's just something to like work on. I don't know. Um, and then I added a section about being values neutral. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but I realized that it was kind of missing. Um, and then here's my summary section. In summary.
I have a thought of something that I think we might want to make sure to include that I don't think we have included right now.
Please, yeah,
And
good.
that's intersectionality of
Mm,
identities and how that it may contribute to trauma.
Yeah. I have that in
I
I
thought
have
that was
that
at the
up
very
here,
beginning. Yeah.
Oh, it
but
is.
it is
Yeah.
not called out specifically though, like in its own section, which I usually do when I'm doing this as a training. I have a whole section that's like, hey, we got to talk about white supremacy, etc. And
Yeah.
I had a hard time making that not be um
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
no,
Oh, you're
sorry,
totally right. You're totally right.
because I think that to your point, it may be worthwhile to have that as its own section. This is again, this is where I struggled because this is where in my trainings, this is like a 20-minute section where I talk about like the history of white supremacy in America and
Yeah.
the birth of a nation and et cetera, et cetera. And it's really hard to condense that down. And also, I a little bit self-censored in that I was like, ugh, is this is it fair for me as the person writing this in this moment to place that in there without knowing that there are probably people on our council, in our committee, et cetera, who may not share that same framework about white supremacy? I don't think it is unfair for us to talk about intersectionality because that's a goddamn fact.
Yeah.
But my framework is so clearly based in like abolition that I struggled a little bit to make it kind of more neutral. So maybe that's a spot for y'all to jump in and see if you have any suggestions. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you for bringing it back to where that was, because I
But I think we could
forgot.
have,
I think it's important enough that it deserves its own section. So like maybe what do the effects of trauma look like? And then before what can trigger or activate a section that's just the importance of intersectionality.
Okay.
And then, and then have that section. I feel like that really is important.
Yeah. And maybe something that
Mhm.
I like where the thought of where to put it, because then in terms of what it can look like, um, I don't know if it would be appropriate to give examples, but we could give examples of like how this might show up differently in different populations, and like the angry Black woman trope or things like that, where like different populations may have things that are trauma that show up as perceived as something different to general
yeah.
populations.
So right now we have like in terms of outline structure, like we have what is trauma, then I go into the 3 E's, then I have physiology, then I have what does trauma look like? And what does trauma look like is kind of where intersectionality comes up. We could just say that, like, if we are, and this is kind of my framework in thinking, so stop me if you think it's too much. If we're defining trauma, what is it? The 3 E's that I think before we even get to physiology, talking about culture is relevant. And so we could just simply put that as like point number 3 is trauma and intersectionality, and give a little bloop there about it. And then again, we're going back to referencing it here, but now with this framework that we already have defined that. Does that feel okay to us?
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to make a comment here. Add in this section.
And I think it's really, I'm really glad that you called that out. I think it's important that intersectionality is not just identity based, but it's also recognized that it's culturally based, that
Yeah.
there are social determinants as well.
Yeah.
There's
So
social determinants.
we could even talk about social determinants
Mhm.
of health kind of explicitly in this section because it is an intersectional issue.
Do we want to bring up ACEs here?
I thought about that a lot,
Yeah.
Okay.
and I reference some of the ACE stuff in here. I have big feelings about ACEs being misused as diagnostic criteria, but it is also a really important thing to understand. So
Maybe just in intersectionality, when we're talking about identities, these can include, one aspect of identity are former experiences, such as, adverse childhood experience. We don't even need to say adverse childhood experiences. We can just say, experiences from childhood or something. Other losses or something. Sorry, I'll be right back.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of trauma not necessarily only being violence that someone experienced, but, a parent being incarcerated, or, yeah, I like that.
yeah, maybe
Although that is violence being experienced,
I
but
know,
not if
right?
you don't have an abolitionist lens.
Right. But maybe this is a place where I can say like, something, or we can say something related to like, research has shown that people who experience trauma in childhood are disproportionately likely to experience these other symptoms or other experiences as adults, and also that we have a broader understanding that that traumas can include these sort of systemic pieces, such as poverty. a parent incarcerated, et cetera, in addition to interpersonal violence. And like this might be the section to say that.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. So it sounds like we have two sort of big tasks. One is we need to add this section, which is a substantial one. And the other is that we need to conclude, because right now my conclusion is just in summary.
In summary, draw your own conclusions.
In summary, do something. And Rowan, I think your point about like making this, like doing a little bit of turn towards praxis is important here of like, okay, we just gave you this dump of information. We gave you a little bit of practices, but like, let's think more big picture, I think would be really great. So I'm just gonna, again, make a note, add in conclusion section, the Rowan note above. Yeah.
I am happy to either draw up kind of an outline of how we want the intersectionality piece to look, or go off of an outline, like draft the actual thing. But if I do that, my ask would probably be to have someone poke me, be like, hey, remember to include these things, just because right now I don't have a great track record of getting things to y'all.
I think we can, yeah, I'll try to find some time this week to make some notes. Maybe if all of us just try to make a couple notes about that, we can, yeah, I don't know even what to say now.
Question. So if we're adding to this document, do we go in and every time we edit, upload a new version, or do we communicate? Yes, every time we go in, even if we don't know if we like what we're saying.
Yeah, because
But
that
it's
way
just
we're
like a
all going to be
draft.
working.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll all be working from the same document. Okay.
Yeah.
And just a note for the trauma and intersectionality piece, so important, but no more than 2 paragraphs, I think, because look, we're at 12 pages already.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, this was my problem.
yeah. What do we
Right?
leave out? Yeah.
This was a section where I was like, again, Martina, maybe we cut the whole explication of how the birth of a nation was the first film ever shown in the White House. Like, we don't even need to go into that. We don't need to talk about the founding of the first KKK. Like, that's not always
Right.
relevant, but it is.
Especially if this is like the only primer that people are,
Right.
if this is the first thing people are seeing.
And since this is an Oregon-based thing, I was like, I have a whole section where I talk about like the founding of Oregon as like a white exclusionary state and like the white supremacy baked into Oregon and like the settler colonialism of it. I was like, again, is this the place for me to define settler colonialism?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. Sometimes Professor Martina needs to shut up.
No, I like the idea of having it be 2 paragraphs or less. That feels very doable. I will put that on my to-dos.
So it sounds like we have our marching orders, that in general, we feel good about the changes that have been made so far. And I'm going to not accept all the changes so that we can continue to see the markup on this version, just because I think that's kind of useful to be able to see what's changed, perhaps. And we got comments that we can throw in there. We have 2 sections that are called out as the spots where we need to do a little bit of, not a little bit, but a total creation. And if there are spots where folks feel compelled to add things, go forth. Thoughts about expand past the Oh, sorry, somebody just rang our doorbell. If you have thoughts about how to expand past just sexual assault as a framework into sexual misconduct, jump in, I say.
Cool.
Oh crap.
Love it.
I am noticing the time and somebody has rung our doorbell and I need to go figure out what's going on. So I probably need to
Okay.
go. I will upload this ASAP.
Okay,
That sounds great. Okay, thank
sounds
you.
good.
Okay.
So sorry to
goodbye.
run away.
No,
worries.
it's okay. It's okay.